Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Dr. Schuster and Oxley, The Power of Stories. We are joined on this occasion by a great friend and a former colleague, Nicki Auret, and we'll introduce her in a moment. So we're looking forward to sharing this episode with her. But before we start, just a few words about the podcast series. We're focusing very much on how storytelling, we think, has an underused or underappreciated value in business life, in professional life. And we're using this forum of podcasts to have a conversation with some friends, some colleagues, and some noteworthy collaborators that have helped us on this journey to try and provide career advice to a new audience. I was interested to research the whole podcast dynamic, and over the space of the last 5-6 years, podcasts have really just exploded. So I was intrigued, a few factoids about podcasts. For example, do you know where the name podcast comes from? I think it's fairly intuitive, but it comes from a combination of iPod and broadcast, podcast. For some reason, I don't know that I had completely focused on where it had come together. So it is to some extent a Steve Jobs legacy. Do you know that a large proportion of people listening to podcasts listen to them not at regular speed, but at a slightly speeded up version? So the three of us will probably sound like chipmunks to a lot of people who are listening to this particular episode. So we probably need to just lower our voices to make them a bit deeper so that when they're sped up, they don't sound quite as squeaky. I think that's quite funny. And a large number of people listening to the podcast, are doing something else at the same time. They're walking, they're doing housework, they are traveling to and from work. So we should also appreciate that, the world multitasks. It simply doesn't do one thing at a time anymore. So Helmut, what are your reflections on podcasts?
I'm actually speechless now. Every time you introduce a new concept, and I was just thinking about, because remembering that Margaret Thatcher lowered her voice to have more gravitas. So I've been obsessing now with the fact, how can I lower my voice the next 30 minutes to basically, no, but actually on a more serious matter, I was never a big fan of podcasts, either listening nor actually doing them. And I think over time, I'm actually getting more comfortable doing them, but also listening to them. I think there are amazing speakers out there. And I hope at one point in time, David, Nicki, I hope that we can play in the same league, which I think we're very close to. So that's my thought on podcasts.
Yeah, I agree.
And I'm delighted to
So
have
I
you here,
mentioned
Nick.
I mentioned earlier our esteemed guest on this occasion is the lovely Nicki Auret. Nicki, Helmut, and I worked together for what seemed like many years. It seems like forever to some extent. Nicki is currently the Chief People Officer with ICBC Standard Bank. Over 30 years of people and HR experience across international domains, starting in South Africa, but also in the UK, where we work together, Asia and the United States. Worked at EY. She and I have that in common. We're both EY alumni. Diageo and, of course, BP before she moved to Standard Bank. She is a board-level advisor on culture and remuneration management strategies, organizational governance, diversity and inclusion, leadership and succession management, and risk management strategies. She's currently responsible as the role of Master of the Universe, I think it says here, of Company of HR Professionals. I may have added a little bit to that description of the City of London. Nicki is an advisor for the People and Remuneration Committee at CAMCO, a specialist climate and impact fund manager, and a trustee of the Friends of the TSIBA, the Education UK, which is a business school in Cape Town. Couple of factoids about Nicki. She is an elite team sport lover and has not missed a Rugby World Cup since 1995. That's interesting. A lover of art from your travels, which is beautifully illustrated by some of the pictures behind you. So, Nicki, welcome to the podcast. The one other thing that I would say is that in my own experience, I was trying to think of a word or a couple of words that for me described Nicki. And the one that kept coming to my mind was courageous. There was something about working with Nicki that I always felt that there was a certain bravery to tackle the elephant in the room, that whenever we were in a conversation, sometimes, difficult conversations with people that were being either awkward or behaving badly, I suppose is the best way to put it. And Nicki always struck me as the person who was prepared to intervene, to say something, to stop whatever was going on and say, let's take a time out. And I absolutely felt that that was one of her defining characteristics. So, Nicki, welcome to the podcast. Helmut, anything that you'd like to add?
Well, I would love to, but I will keep it very short. I mean, Nikki, I've known you for such a long period of time. And there are three things I really and absolutely admire in you. Firstly, you always look for new things. You always were very open-minded. The second thing is the grit. And this is you get things done. You get stuff done. You don't need to be liked. You just get the right things done. And thirdly, and this is actually what I love most about you, you like fun, you're joyful, and you're a very warm and kind person. And the combination of the three is a very, very, very rare thing, in particular in the HR space. So we're very, very privileged having you. Thank you.
Thank you both so much. Sure what to say. I don't always feel courageous. These jobs we do in the people space, they do take courage. They do take energy to dig deep some days, to tackle the elephant in the room, and to just try and create an environment where people can thrive, not just in their work, but in their life. So it's I have such fond memories of working with both of you, and you are privileged to call you friends now too. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much, David. But perhaps, yes, an illustration of courage is abseiling down the cheese grater the other day for the Lord Mayor's charity. Actually, I enjoyed that very much. As long as I looked, maybe there's something in there. Just look out and up. Don't look down and don't look back.
Always look ahead. There's something in that,
Always
isn't there?
look
There's
ahead.
always about looking forward. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Well, Nicki, you are primed to tell us a story, and the idea is that these stories are something that's meaningful for you or has had meaning for you in your professional life, but something that we can share with the audience and then discuss why we think it has meaning for you and why it might resonate for others.
Great, thank you. And I'm going to read this story. I remember early on in my career coming across the concept of a story for the third ear, and it speaks for itself. I think that it's sometimes what sits behind the story that, of course, has its true value. So indulge me while I share an African tale. It's called The Handshake That Remembered. In the days when the stars still guided travelers and every tree had a name, the land faced a great drought. Rivers ran dry, crops withered, and the people's patience thinned like the clouds above them. Leaders from the neighboring tribes were called to gather under the tree of listening, an ancient fig tree known to witness peace and truth. Tensions were high. Some came with guards, others with blame. Trust was the first casualty of the drought. But among them stood Jabari, an elder from the lowlands. He came with no guards, no title, and nothing in his hands, only his voice, and the weight of many seasons behind his eyes. The chiefs argued, trading words like arrows. Jabari said nothing. He walked slowly to the center of the circle and turned to face them. He extended his hand to the first chief. "Before your mouth speaks," he said, "let your hand tell me why you are here." The chief, surprised, reached out and clasped Jabari's hand. It was a firm, deliberate handshake, not rushed, not for show. There was silence. Then another chief stepped forward, and another. Each handshake was different. One hesitant, one strong, one shaking slightly with age. When the last hand was shaken, Jabari looked at them all and said, "When hands meet in truth, spirits remember the path." He paused. A handshake is not just flesh to flesh. It's memory touching memory. It's how our ancestors greeted both friend and stranger. It is the first step before peace, the last act after war. If we cannot hold each other with truth, we cannot hold the future. That night, the leaders did not sign anything, but they sat in a circle, shared food, and spoke not of power, but of people. The rains did not return immediately, but when they did, they came not to the strongest nor the loudest, but to those who had remembered how to reach across. To this day, the people of that land teach their children this: a deal made with the mouth may fade, but a handshake made in truth walks with you forever.
Take a bow. It was beautifully read. I mean, great story, but beautifully delivered. Nicki, the first question is why select that story? Why does it stand out?
I think there's so much in this for me. I chose the story probably for two primary reasons. One, the first is the literal handshake and the essence of it in human connection, in collaboration, and in building meaningful relationships, the output of which is trust. And I think trust is everything. I think it's a language, and I think you can decide coming into handshake what you want your message to be. But there is so much behind it too that it symbolizes in its universal nature, its meaning of respect, as I say, of trust, of commitment. There are many words we can explore that sit behind that. And the second reason was, besides its literal meaning for me, which is about connection and core to what I do and what I stand for, it's also a significant part of my personal purpose is about the generational handshake. And that's the commitment to turn up and in our 100-year lives, if we're privileged enough, to leave something in better shape than you found it. And as a mother, sure, but also as an aunt, as a godparent, and as a friend, it's something I try and hold myself to. That have you left this in better shape than you found it? And then what's our broader generational handshake in our role in the world? So handshakes itself, I think there's also, as far back as I can remember, my father taught us the importance of greetings, whether it was answering the phone and making the right introductions, to importantly connecting, to greeting somebody, standing when I greeted them, shaking their hand, looking them in the eye. And I find myself, of course, passing that on to Luke, my son, and trying to teach him the importance of good manners, turning up and being present in a greeting. And then, of course, I've reflected that over the years, it's more than just being polite. It is this language. It is this meet people where they are and consider the non-verbal cues that you get out of a handshake. And so I feel like I'm also teaching him to reach out to people literally and figuratively, and how important that is in life. That's some of the context around.
Wow.
Helmut, any
Nicki.
questions for you?
Yeah, no question, really. I really, really like that you introduced the notion of generational handshake. And oddly enough, I've been thinking about that for quite some time. And every time this year I go to the Youth Assembly in New York, people are normally no older than 32, 500, 600, 100 people. And I think it always ends up in this notion of trust and basically the notion of leaving things behind in a better shape than they used to be. I think this is the responsibility which I think our generation needs to think about very deeply. Unfortunately, we don't think about that. But I also liked that you represent handshake as a language. Yeah? And so the question I really have, you talked a lot about your son and you talked a lot about your father, how he taught you the importance of greetings. Can you tell a bit more the importance of greetings, how you handle that, but also like, how do you see that in the context of careers, HR, companies, where handshake quality is something which doesn't really exist anymore, at least in my belief?
I think you're so right. And obviously we know in our most recent history what's some of the things that have separated us physically, and how I certainly don't take face-to-face connection for granted anymore. But certainly in terms of greetings, yeah, it goes. I think in my work, it's funny how at the beginning, if I think of just board contexts that I work in, I'm often the only one that stands up, come into the boardroom. Now immediately I'm amongst, the elders, but the great and the good of the sort of senior executive, non-executive of the bank. And I'm walking in and it's easy to feel a little bit intimidated by a situation like that. One of the ways I come in, and level set that and try and establish myself. I mean, it's an equality kind of act, is to greet every member around the board table with a handshake. Yes, in some instances, I haven't seen these people recently, but even if I have, there's something about today we are here and we are in the now. And I think that does sit in the sort of open-mindedness, but this meet people where they are was something very core to my father's values and very, very contextual and cultural for us growing up. He played a role when in 1994, when South Africa had their first free and fair elections post Mandela's release. He was a chief electoral officer for the district, which had to be somebody he was considered completely neutral, independent, that was going to bring the best to monitor fairness, but actually help ultimately bring people together in a historic context and encourage them to exercise their right in that instance to vote. But there would have been so many handshakes, literal and figuratively, in that context. And so it was no surprise to me that he was considered somebody, an elder in the district that would play that role. So I think there's that connection is just something I've always had the value of seeing role model to me, and that I try and role model not just in my family life, but also in my work, and that I think in my career. And I think it's an interesting question, the sort of the role of handshakes in careers. I mean, we could talk about the first impression people and my learnings around, feeling who's come, this lovely gesture around before your mouth speaks, let your hand, sorry, this phrase from the story, let your hand tell me why you are here. I think that's a lovely way to think about it, because if we don't see people connect, and there's also that context when you first come together with a loaded agenda, maybe it is a fairly aggressive meeting or people coming with an even if it's not aggressive and it's a dysfunctional situation, it's everybody's coming into the room with their own from their own contexts. So, and of course context is important. Cultural norms need to be considered when you're engaging people, and you can't judge a greeting just through a Western lens, for example. I appreciate that. But it is a commonality. It is a universal language that we see that just transcends, if we think it does transcend nations. It transcends nations in work. It transcends nations in politics. In sports is a lovely, lovely sort of illustration, I think, of handshakes coming to life. That, the end of a tennis match, how tennis players will come to the net and shake hands regardless of the outcome, in respect, in mutual respect, in recognition, in sportsmanship. Rugby, you mentioned, David, I'm a rugby fan. Yes, I am. And it's this concept of 80 minutes of bruised, bloodied, brawl and brawn. And at the end, there's this concept, this moment where the score the game transcends the score. It becomes bigger, and it's about, I meet you, I honor your game, I kind of see your effort. And this is about the unity. So I think that just is just so important. And finally, I just say in my career in HR and in the people business, this particularly in a digital age, how important it's going to continue to be to reach out, to find the power in the human touch and input to build meaningful relationships and connection, and encourage those and facilitate those in what we do, where we can, as humans can innovate together and sort of augmented by machines. And we know that's a whole concept. But if we are going to shape the future, if we're going to be the architects in HR, for shaping the workplaces of the future, how are we making sure that we're creating the space for both literal and figurative?
Brilliant. David, questions?
Yes, Nicki, I think another side of the story, or something that I got from it, is Jabari was able to suspend or see beyond agendas, suspicions, competition. In professional life, we often end up painting people as adversaries or competitors. and assign them certain convenient, if you will, personas that well, that person would say that, wouldn't they? That person would act in that particular way in certain circumstances. And in our own narrative that we carry around with us between our ears, we walk around the office and we attend meetings, and sometimes we pretend to be, and I say this from a personal standpoint, so I'll just, forthrightly share that this is something that I've experienced, that, I will find that when I'm in the presence of certain people in the office, I find it hard to see beyond what I see their personal agenda, a notion of getting something that they want, even if it's not necessarily the right thing for the company. And I find myself struggling to see beyond that. Is that a theme that comes out of the story for you, that Jabari is able to raise above the...
That totally resonates, and I agree. It is in that role that he played, and in indeed saying this is actually, we're in the now. And we're all facing adversity, and we're all facing a challenge here. It's a time of strife, but actually we're stronger together. But it's rebasing. And I think it's a real skill. And we don't always get it right and I'm with you, David, that often we go home and we'll spend a lot of time thinking about something that for somebody else was literally a moment and my inner voice is always, is often way too strong. And then, I trust my inner voice, but I can overthink is probably the reality. And when you're emotionally intelligent, it's a gift, but it's also, it's a double-edged sword, because you can do just that. You can overthink, and it's hard to let it go, particularly if it's something that seems to go against your values. You feel in my instance, it's my integrity in question here. I'm coming at this from a place of wishing to resolve and in good faith, and it doesn't feel like that. So yeah, I think there's something about the skill of facilitating a level checking in, the role of that check-in.
I'd like to elaborate just a little bit further and say, we're talking very much about careers and about professionals and about how you handle the corporate game. And in fact, that's a large part of what A Groundhog Career, our second book, is about. This notion that you're transported into this strange world of corporateness where, there is a game, whether we want to accept it or not. And the game is an annual appraisal process, and someone's going to evaluate you, and your colleagues to some extent are competing with you for the prize at the end of the year to be the school head of whatever. And so this idea that you're in a foot race up a corporate ladder, it's a complex scenario, because I think you can be idealistic about it and say, well, you shouldn't play that game. You should be trying to get the best shared outcome. And then, those people go back to their families who they're fighting for to get the scraps off the table, to get a bigger pay rise and pay bills and put their kids through school. And there's a balance between this sort of promoting your own personal ambition and balancing that with not treading on people in the process unnecessarily. But it's not, at least in my mind, it's nuanced. It's not sort of, you should never try and strive to win at work, and win is a complex, loaded term. But on the flip side, you should never necessarily sit back and just let things wash over you and spend your time just idly chatting with people. Do you get my drift, that there's two ends of that particular spectrum? So how do you balance that?
I think it's really, I feel like, are you in my world at the moment? Just to happen to be around? I mean, am I just tuning into things that are, feel like my current reality? But is it just, it's got to be about one enterprise and role for all, I think. If that we do come into work, obviously with purpose, and that we're lucky enough to love what we do and sustain our lives and our livelihoods and our dependence for it. Wonderful, sweet spot. And presumably that's kind of the actualization of being able to find that balance, if not just in formal work, and in the informal work that we do. And yeah, I am involved in the HR company in the city, and a lot of it is about giving back and furthering the profession and fellowship and connecting. But it is largely about giving back. And I think that's that sort of returning years stage of my life, where it's also about paying it forward to people. But back to the day job and back to careers and corporate ladders. But you mentioned the annual appraisal, and I mean, even that's just, gets a lot of flack for its real value, right? And its purpose. And yet, if we don't create the space to give each other feedback or to try and, we say it's a key input to the numbers, but yeah, it drives some strange behavior. I've yet to see a 360 that actually works because of that, because it's a competitive scenario, it feels at the end of the day. But does it need to be? And if we just value the collective, we all in the service of one enterprise. And I think that's really important. Too often, both for gain and for blame, we perhaps look at ourselves depending on how we're wired. And it's too quick. We sort of, I had nothing to do with that, or oh yeah, that's actually, oh my gosh, it was all me. Those are the two spectrums. Ideally, it's probably somewhere in between. But accountability and taking accountability for your role, and a role that everybody, if in the perfect organization, utopia, you've got a role that brings the best people together, all of whom bring what they're great at, and it comes together in this perfect recipe for one enterprise and stakeholder delivery, whoever those stakeholders are. But it's I do think it takes a balance, and we're allowed to. And actually, let's just call it thriving. Let's just call it. If part of that is up a corporate ladder, but actually the definition of thriving can't just be up. It's got to be, we know in current contexts.
So true, so true, so true, yeah.
Got to come in different shapes and forms.
Very true, very true. Nicki, I have a question here. And there's one thing which really impressed me with the story, because when Jabari at the beginning, everyone was talking, posturing, telling how great they are, came with the entourage. He was quiet and quiet. And this notion of quietness and silence enabled later on for real conversations and trust to occur. Now, we all have been in the corporate game, and nobody's quiet, and the executives are the loudest of all. It's about posturing. Do you see, like, in your experience, is this getting better? Do leaders, executives basically understand? Do you teach the next generation that for the career, that listening is as important as talking? I mean, the advice I always give to youngsters, that if you get the interview to talk more than you do, you will get the job. Because once you get the interviewers, the boss, to talk more, they will like you because you listen. Yeah. So any views you have on that? Any perspective?
Yeah, my perspective is a mature organization does this naturally, and mature relationships and a healthy organization does this, but it's often down to a chair in the room. And it shouldn't be down to one. I think it needs to be down to all, to respect that and to understand it. But I do think it helps if you've got a really good chair facilitator looking and listening and ensuring they draw out the voices. It's often that voice that you hear 2/3 through the conversation.
I agree.
The nugget.
I mean, I'm not sure you probably remember Bob Dudley. He always said, listen to the silent voice in the room. And still that resonates very much with me so many years later.
Very much so. Very much so. I think it's critical. And I mean, I'm comfortable holding silence, actually, but I also think there's that calm, and maybe it's that setting the tone at the beginning of an engagement. And it wouldn't have been obvious that that was what Jabari was doing. So there's something in that power to, as you say, to walk in a moment. And he had wisdom about him. He would have been seen as an elder. And I think that's maybe the traditional way that we've sort of, run enterprises and organizations in the command control, top of the shop is is obviously the only person that really has the institutional knowledge or experience or the wisdom. But now we know in multi-generational workforces that we've got in rapidly changing times, in environments where digital transformation is at the fingertips of people, that we need to leverage the experience and the skill of everybody, across the organization. And I think that's yeah, it's really important that we are opening our ears and our hands to everybody's contribution, actually.
Love that. Opening ears, opening hands. David, I think we
Yes.
slowly need to
Yes, we'll transition into our last segment here. So really just to wrap up that section, and let's just see if we can leave a couple of sound bites here, a couple of summaries. So Nicki, if on the level of what sort of little snippet of advice would you give to someone just starting their career on how to balance striving for personal ambition with not allowing it to get in the way of building trust with people around you? The idea, going back to some extent to what you were saying, is that the boardrooms very often are made up of type A personalities who are hard driving, we're going to do something very difficult, strive to do something very difficult, and to really push the organization to do something that's uncomfortable. And that empathetic gene that we have tends to get suppressed or suspended. So what advice would you give to the individuals in their 20s and 30s that are in their careers saying, hey, I want to get the next promotion? How do you balance those two things?
So I'd say that, and you're right, there are many hungry grads in our organization even now. But it's not just graduates, right? It's also people who might have been at a role for a long time. And we're finding one of the biggest challenges in an organization where our growth is more subdued enterprise-wide, just creating that opportunity to actually, what if promotion equals success? It's a challenge because there ain't enough room for everybody to necessarily just keep climbing a ladder. My advice, I think and that I would probably give, but I'm also just reflecting more generally in my experience. I think thriving in development comes in many shapes and forms. That's the first thing I'd say. So whilst the traditional path and what might be seen as a bigger job in a hierarchy was the way that we measured success in the past, it is not the way I certainly don't measure success in people development growth in the same way. I think it's about experiences. I think it's about taking advantage of opportunities, yes, that present themselves, but doing it in an authentic, in an open way. Think of authenticity and agency often in the two sides of a coin. I think agency is absolutely key, and that's our right to choice, our right to choose to stay in an organization. It's also our choice, the right to choose to go. We do a lot of our development program support, and we're emerging leader support, and giving people confidence to believe in what they do have to offer, and that also that there's a bigger world out there, and we're okay with that. We're about growth and development for personal, but for allowing people, whether they further their careers in the bank or more broadly. That might sound counterintuitive. It might sound like bad business value, but actually the reality is we're okay with that. We want people to come to work and be the best versions of themselves because we will benefit from that and help them and support them to thrive. So I think it's not always in front of you. It may be in a broader ecosystem. Your development and growth may come in a volunteering sense or in a non-executive sense more broadly. I think it often, it may come in adventure across the globe. It may come in being open to mobility in a way that you've never really consciously thought. It does come in the form of speaking up. There's agency, there's authenticity, there's allyship. I think that's also, it's about speaking up, finding allies, finding advisors, speaking to people who will give you perspective, who will connect you to opportunities, either within an organization, beyond, or whilst you're in an organization in terms of other broader experiences. So I just don't think that there is just a fixed formula that perhaps traditionally there would have been. And multinationals do a great job still, I think, of being able to have the ability to move people around. BP was exceptional like that. BP was exceptional, and ICBC do it too in terms of moving talent around. But I think the world.
I have to give kudos here to Dr. Schuster, because he said you've got to live life on 3 dimensions. There is the quantitative, there is the qualitative, and then there is the authenticity of being yourself. And you have to somehow, sit on these a stool with 3 legs, one of them missing, you end up falling over. I'm paraphrasing Helmut, but that was something that you told me once, which has stayed with me for a long time. Helmut, do you have some final questions for Nicki?
Well, not really final question. I think I just want to thank you very much. And Nicki, I mean, we've met recently. I think I love your authenticity. Now, over the years, you've added a lot of wisdom to their authenticity, which is great to see, considering they're still so young. And you left me with one gift, and it's not a question, but this generational handshake, it's something which I think I'm going to reflect a bit on before I go to the youth assembly, because I think it's a very important concept. I've not really thought about that. So thank you so much.
Wonderful. Brilliant.
Nicki, thank you. Let's close off this particular episode of The Power of Stories, Dr. Schuster and Oxley, on this occasion with the extraordinary Nicki Auret. If you liked this podcast, there are others for you to listen to, and we would encourage you to do so. This may be episode 9 or 10. This has been one of the better ones, but there are others that you should definitely check out. We'll put the links in the screen here. If you like the podcast, you're going to love the books. There are 2 books out, 3rd book coming out in November. Artificial Death of a Career comes out in November. We'll start to be talking about that a lot more over the coming months. Our website and our social media presence on Instagram are worth checking out, as is the content we put on LinkedIn. So we would encourage you to do all of that. Nicki's mentioned a couple of times the Honorary Society, Secret Society of Human Resource Professionals in London. Nicki, anything that you'd like, if someone's interested in joining that, would you tell them how to go about it?
Absolutely. We do those even handshakes, very open hands to welcoming any senior HR professionals who are looking at connecting in with others for fellowship, to support us in furthering the profession, very much in shaping the future of the profession, of educating and certainly giving back in a generational handshake. The oldest worshipful company in the City of London is nearly 1,000 years old, and we may only be 10 years old, but we're looking to be here for hundreds of years to come. In the belief that the HR profession stands in a critically alongside other professions in the City of London, and belongs as a critical component of business, then that's what we're about. So we have a website, Company of HR Professionals, and or find me on LinkedIn, and I'll tell you more.
Okay, and we will give you the links to all of those things. So with that, thank you very much for our thousands of listeners for tuning in once again. It is a pleasure, Nicki. Thank you so much. With that, Helmut. It is.
Thank you. See you soon. And servus und hasta la vista. Thank you, Nicki. Thank you, David, for being such a great host.
Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you both. Bye. Happy days. Cheers.